of that and give you our gut reactions on all things pop culture, film, TV and theatre. We talk the legends in the creative industry and those on the rise. We game old school. We do all of this, and a whole lot more. Like, subscribe, and get involved. Join Lance Dean, Anthony Nielsen, and the Outcast Creative.
It's the voice of Gary Bolter from the Outcast Creative in Australia, making our channel sound sexy with his fantastic voiceover. So today I'm going to be interviewing a very special man, a very knowledgeable man, an old friend of mine who I haven't actually seen for quite a while, but was very helpful in one of my earlier film projects. We'll get into all of that on the stream. So don't forget, if you've got any questions for my guest, you can put them in the chat and I'll do my best to get around to them. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. If you haven't subscribed already, check out the other industry interviews. This is number 61. There are 60 others on the channel with all kinds of people from different fields: writers, directors of photography, stuntmen, actors, and so on. But the gentleman that's coming in today is a very specific kind of writer. I think it's fair to call him a historian because his books are a specialty on World War II and in particular British forces, and of interest to me, of course, British Airborne Forces, which if you watched the channel before, you will know is my main area of interest. So without any further ado, let's welcome to the Outcast Creative Neil Barber, spelled N-E-I-L, not N-I-E-L, as is put on our poster by accident. Sorry about that, Neil.
Hello,
good to see you again, sir. So before we delve into your historical milieu, as it were, I'm just going to ask you a few standard questions that I ask every guest that comes on the channel, so we can get a bit of a sense of your no, not your age. That might be a giveaway, but no, the kind of things that you grew up with, film and TV wise, that sort of stuff, because obviously that's a big part of what my channel does. So can you tell me the first movie you can remember going to see on the big screen as a kid?
Well, obviously, it'd be one that my mum took me to, so it could have been Snow White, Bambi, or something like that.
Is there one that particularly sticks in your memory from your youth that was like your Star Wars? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that would have been similarly Doctor Who. I love that film, the first Doctor Who with Peter Cushing.
Oh, with
Daleks in colour. What else could you?
Yeah,
want?
with the Daleks.
Yeah,
that's interesting because I mean, I've got the book about the making of that right here. I don't know if you've seen this book.
No.
Yeah. This is about the making of the two Doctor Who movies. So John, who wrote this, John Walsh, there's an interview with him on my channel, but there's also an interview with Jason Fleming on my channel. Jason Fleming's dad, Gordon Fleming, directed both of these films.
Crikey, right.
Yeah. So Jason will be extremely pleased to hear you say that that's one of those, that's like your Star Wars movie. He'll be well chuffed. I actually got to see Dalek Invasion of Earth at the cinema on a Saturday morning once. It was like, you know, they had older films and they would sometimes put them on Saturday morning. Yeah, so I got to see that. What was the last film you saw on the big screen?
Crikey, it would be I've gone blank. It's Peter, the one the RWN did, where they put all the footage together and the sound, and I haven't been for quite a while.
Do you mean the Peter Jackson thing?
Peter Jackson film.
They
shall not grow old. They shall
not grow old. Fantastic.
Yeah, that was
great.
incredible.
Now, at this point, if it's somebody that works in film and television, I normally ask them a British actor or actress that they'd like to work with. I'm not going to ask you that question. I'm going to turn that question slightly on its head, knowing your interest in World War II. What topic of World War II would you most like to see a film or a TV series about that hasn't been made yet?
well, obviously, with that being, it would be something to do with the 6th Airborne, because you've got one about Arnhem. So and the 6th Airborne doesn't really receive the same publicity when it did a fantastic job and had some incredible people serving with it, both in the ranks and as officers. It was a special division.
So, I mean, you're talking about predominantly their role in Africa, Sicily, and D-Day, as well as, of course, Operation Fighting, which was technically the first main operation.
Yeah, I mean, there's not enough British airborne films. Full stop. So, what is there apart from really? You've got obviously Bridge Too Far.
Sure.
Brief Glory, of course, which there'll be nothing ever made like that again.
Yeah.
Incredible. But no, with the 6th Airborne, you take your pick. Normandy, the Ardennes, the Rhine crossing.
Yeah.
There's plenty of information there.
All I can tell you, Neil, is I'm doing my best still to make that happen. Tell me a film that's one that you will probably watch at least once a year.
Oh, crikey. This Happy Breed.
Oh, yeah, that's a great movie.
I love it. Always have done.
Also, it's also been a play, and I always remember the scene where the two of them are getting drunk, and he keeps going up these Surreys. And, yeah, I remember that. Do you have a favourite television drama series in the last 20 years that's really stood out for you as groundbreaking? I think I might know what your answer might be, but
really, well, I'll probably surprise you. Well, I will say I've never been hooked. Well, if it's not Second World War,
right?
I would say Spartacus.
Oh, the Australian.
Yes.
TV. Yeah, that's. Do you know what that
Amazing.
show is absolutely brilliant. Such good writing. It was so sad what happened to Andy Whitfield.
It was. That was very sad. Yeah.
And
the whole series. I mean, it took a while to get used to the new fella, but
yeah,
the
it's good
script and every episode was jaw dropping.
Yeah,
brilliantly written and acted.
I couldn't agree more. All right, well, let's those are my quick questions out of the way. Let's get on to your career. So let's go back in time. To just tell me a bit about your background prior to getting into writing. You leave school, presumably. How did your interest in World War II start? Did that kind of stem from watching movies like myself, like Bridge Too Far, Longest Day, that kind of thing? Or where did that come from?
Yeah, there were a few things really. As a kid, you had all sorts of. Obviously, I grew up. I was born in 1960, so I had all of the 60s. People were still about, and certain things. I've thought about this, and there's certain things that do impact on me back then. And one was the death of Churchill, because the BBC, as I remember, did like a week-long series about him, which I thought, crikey, this bloke was impressive. So I remember that. All Our Yesterdays was another one, which I always loved watching. And then, of course, you got the standard Dad's Army. What else was about then? And yeah, films, Battle of Britain, Tora, 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 Where Eagles Dare, and even things like Bed Knobs and Broomsticks. I always remember loving that because it had that history feel to it. And so those sort of things. I mean, the biggest influence really was my uncle. Not that he ever forced anything on us, but he went right through the lot, Jeff Hayward. And all he used to do was tell funny stories about his experiences. And of course, it's only later in life, when you're older, you realise, well, that's not really funny. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
But he appears sort of later on, because obviously, whenever I saw him, I was always trying to get him to talk about the war, because he'd been at Dunkirk. Then he went to North Africa. He was at Alamein. Then he did the Sicily invasion where he was wounded. Back for D-Day, although because of congestion he didn't get on land till the following day. And then right through the European campaign and earned the MM in Germany. So he was a big influence right away. In fact, it wouldn't. None of this would have happened without him, because he, as a kid, he always talked about this notorious place, the Chateau Saint Côme. And when I first took him over there in '94, that was where he went. And because he was a Vickers machine gunner, all the map references, the grid references, were in the war diary. So we visited all these places that he was at. It was quite incredible. But
yeah,
he was a big influence. But I mean, history is always, I've always loved that sort of thing. As you say about school, I liked history at school. I liked all that sort of thing. But we never reached the Second World War. When I
well, World War II wasn't on the curriculum until much later.
that's right.
We just it just came in just as I was leaving in the 80s, and I remember doing absolutely massive written assignments on it. You know,
Yeah.
like sending my teacher all these maps of
Yes.
market garden and stuff, and she'd be going like, "Oh wow, this is good." You know, I was quite happy to write long papers about that sort of thing. You mentioned All Our Yesterdays as an influence. For anyone who doesn't know, this documentary television series, which ran in 1960, is considered by many to be the precursor documentary series to World at War, which of course is the famous one that Laurence Olivier narrates. So I assume this is the show you meant. Is that right?
Yeah, in fact, it's rung a bell as well. I mean, it's his face, but the other thing as well, the predecessor, of course, of World at War was the Great War series.
Yeah,
and I remember that as a kid. And when they issued that a good few years ago now as a video, I couldn't believe when I put the first episode on, and that tune that they had with it, the theme tune, I hadn't heard it since, and it just was haunting, really haunting, and it brought it all back. It was a strange feeling.
Yeah, my grandfather was in the trenches in World War One, and I only found that out when I found a whole load of pictures of him and his platoon in uniform. Never talked about it. Apparently, he hated the experience. It scarred him for quite a long time.
Not surprising.
No, well, indeed, what we would call PTSD now. So, so sort of moving on from that. So, how old were you? Writing books? Because you've done several books, and we're going to talk about all of them for those people watching. So we will get around to that in a sec. But just in terms of the process of you becoming, for want of a better word, a historical author, how did that begin? What was the beginnings of that, and what was the first book, and how did that come about? Give us a bit of background.
Well, I didn't, as you just said about history at school, and you didn't do the Second World War. So I decided not to take it as an option, because I thought, well, how am I going to make a living out of it? I didn't want to be a teacher.
Right.
That was probably a wise decision, looking back on it, actually. But so I'd always carried on. It was my passion, or amongst one or two others, football, whatever. But I always read prolifically when it came to the Second World War, and so I always did my own thing. And then, ironically, I never ever read fiction. And my uncle gave me a book called Covenant with Death, and said, "You've got to read this." It was fiction, First World War. I think you might have read it, John Harris.
I haven't read any fiction World War One books.
Well, it's about the only one I'll ever recommend. But it was he based it on the Accrington Powells.
Ah, yeah.
And it was just stunning, where you got to know the characters, and then of course they go over the top and then gone.
Yeah.
And that got me interested in the Somme. I mean, I'd always had this general interest in the First World War anyway, but I went out to the Somme the following year and spent the next 10 years doing things on the Western Front, going out, doing my own thing, researching before I went out there, about the men, really. You obviously learn about the battles and what went on where, but really it was the men that have always interested me.
And how old were you when you sort of first started dalliancing with this?
I was 24, nearly 25 when I first went out to the Western Front.
And so when you started researching things, did you already have it in your mind? Right, I'm going to do a book about some of the people that fought in World War One, or did
No,
that come later?
no, I had no inkling at all to do that. It was just purely for my own education. I did put photograph albums together, quite detailed ones, of the Somme. You know, I'd walked the whole 18 miles of the front. You could, I don't know if you still can. I haven't been there for a while, but I just absolutely loved it. I mean, it's almost like being at home, isn't it? The cemeteries and everything just dominate the area. And it was only really well, I've jumped a bit, but I first went out to Normandy in '93, and then the following year, I said to my uncle, you know, how about coming out there? And he was a bit worried because he knew, of course, the damage that had been done to Normandy. He didn't know if he'd be particularly well received. And so we went out there just after we deliberately missed the 50th anniversary. We went 2 weeks later.
Right.
And
probably a wise decision.
Yeah, from the sound, yeah. But and we visited the Chateau Saint Com. So from what I was doing in the Western Front, again, I wanted to find out more about it because nothing I'd ever found had mentioned this place, and he told me how appalling it was. So I started scratching around then about it, and then the following year, his carrier driver came out, Dennis Daly, and Dennis was actually in the chateau on the 12th of June when the Germans were attacking and the Black Watch were taking all sorts of casualties. And
So-
that's when I first thought, I'm going to really look into this again for my own benefit. I mean, sorry.
Chateau, just for the benefit of people listening in.
Yeah.
You're talking about Chateau de Com in Normandy.
Yes, on the Breville Ridge, which overlooks Pegasus Bridge.
Yeah, and the fighting that happened in and around it, sort of within the first 2 weeks of the week and the immediate week and the week after, I guess.
That's right. Yeah.
So for anyone, and that was a chateau that was in. Again, this particular battle, not my area of expertise, but I believe it was in the hands of the British. But didn't it change hands a few times in the first couple of days?
Well, the chateau was the 9th Parachute Battalion didn't have enough men to hold the chateau.
That's right.
So it was in effect no man's land. And I won't go into detail, but Otway, the CO of the battalion, tried to deny it to the Germans by aggressive patrolling and this sort of thing. And he had actually occupied an area of woods in front of some open ground, which he used as a killing ground. And that's the way it turned out. You know, it really, for the amount of men there and the weight of the attacks that were coming in, I mean, they were alone until 11th of June when the 5th Black Watch was sent up to help. It was amazing.
Am I right in thinking the area that we're talking about is here, just south of Breville?
That's right. Yes. Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the monument to the 51st.
Yeah, that's actually where they took up position. That wood there called the Bois des Monts.
So the fighting would have all been sort of around this area here, really, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that house just south of where that blue marker is, that was the Otway's headquarters and the regimental aid post.
This one here?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I've been all round this part of Normandy, and even though most of the bocage has gone, it's all got that very, very distinctive, you know, lots of high grey stone walls, all that kind of thing. It's a nightmare both from a attacking and defending point of view. Not easy. So this would be the actual chateau. I think this grey building here.
That's the chateau. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. So gradually, this is kind of sowing seeds of. I assume you're digesting a lot of books, and at some point, you're going to come to the conclusion that there's not really any books out there about these particular battles and these actions and stuff. So at some point, you're formulating in your mind to write a book, I'm guessing. Do you want to talk us into that?
Well, only when, I was just so in awe of veterans that I just hardly speak to them earlier when I started. And Dennis Daly, who was telling you about the carrier driver, he literally dragged me to 2 9th Battalion veterans in Ronville Cemetery on one of the anniversaries. And we got talking, and they were very encouraging about me speaking to a few of them. And I got in touch with a reunion club through them, and it just expanded from there, really. I've always said I can't believe they were so welcoming, because I've got no track record as such.
We've got Chris Cornell's in the chat, who of course is a relative of Sidney Cornell, one of the first black paratroopers in the British Army, which is one of the episodes of Paratrooper, the TV show I'm trying to get made. Doug Moody's here as well.
Hello, Doug.
Yeah, when my dad became a mortarman. So we've got a few relatives of veterans. 16 people watching. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're just getting started. If you've got a question for Neil as we go along, please put them in the chat. I'll try and get around to them, and we'll get into as much of this as we can. So what was the first book for you? Which is the first book you did?
The Day the Devils dropped in, about the Parachute Battalion, yeah, at Merville and St. Cobb, yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, for a lot of people, again, if you've seen The Longest Day, which is my introduction to D-Day, and here's the area of the Somme, incidentally, but we're going to jump from that. So everybody knows about Pegasus Bridge, because of course it's covered in the Longest Day movie. Here it is, previously known as previously known as the Benneville Bridge. The original bridge is here. Look at how much smaller it is, because of course the canal wasn't as wide as this back in 1944. It's been widened since then a couple of times, actually. But what a lot of people don't know is that probably the toughest mission of all was 3 gliders were assigned to land in the perimeter of a German gun battery, which had been wrongly identified as having, I think it was 155 pounders, but it was actually
155 millimeter guns.
Yeah, but I think they weren't as good as that. They were Czech
Skoda 100 millimeter guns.
Yeah. So this basically is a German battery. It was surrounded on one side by a tank trap trench, which wasn't complete. It was supposed to go around the whole thing, but was also surrounded by like 3 belts of mines, machine gun posts, barbed wire, etc. 3 gliders were supposed to come in and land in the center of this, coordinated with an attack from the outside. That didn't happen. 2 of the gliders overshot the drop zone completely. The one that did arrive nearest landed just outside it and was on fire when it came over, if memory serves me correct. And the plan was to assault the battery with around 1,000 men, something like that? The original plan?
No. If everyone had got there, they would have had 750 at the most.
That's right. But they
units,
and they had to assault it with around 150, I think.
Yes, yeah, and all the equipment gone, all the heavy equipment.
So yeah, so your first book, The Day the Devils Drop In, does cover this quite extensively. You cover the 9th Battalion's mission with Merville, and you also cover some of the other actions that took place, as well as things like the para that dropped in with an Alsatian dog, and other stuff. This museum, for anyone that hasn't been, often gets overlooked on people's trips to Normandy. I'd highly recommend you visit it. It's a fantastic museum, extremely well preserved. Not quite sure about this hangar thing that they've stuck in it now, but that didn't used to be there before. But I think they were worried about the plane sort of weathering in the weather and whatnot. I don't know.
Yeah, it is a national treasure. That's why they've had to. Got that status, so they had to protect it. Unfortunately, yeah, they built that in that position, but
yeah, it is, But yeah, but these guys have the people that run it are great. In fact, one of the episodes of Paratroop is supposed to be about the Merville attack. It's one of the scripts I actually haven't written yet. And when we were talking to them about it, they said, yeah, if you want to come and you can use the entire site, you can redress it, all the rest of it. We'd have to cover it with artillery shells, but I think we would do that with CGI. There's a question for you here, Neil, from Ernie. Welcome to the channel, Ernie. Would you have preferred the Merville Battery to be left untouched and have the museum set back 100 yards or so?
I don't know about untouched. Certainly, there's been improvement since there was just the #1 casemate as a museum. I mean, #2 casemate, I think, is just fantastic.
That's the one with the show. With
it's one with the screens showing their faces and all their
the
pictures are on the wall. And I don't believe there is anything like it for a single battalion in Normandy. That's really, I think, it's special because you can see the men's faces and there's little notes about where they served and things like that. That's great. Yeah. The hangar, I don't most people who know me know what I think about that.
Well, you don't. I mean, Phil, you don't have to express a firm view on it if you don't wish.
There have been improvements. I put on a personal thing. I believe it should have been just left as a 9th Battalion attraction as such. There was lots more to do, and that would have been absolutely unique. I mean, they do cover other stuff, obviously 6 Airborne in the casemates, but of course you've got a lot of that in Memorial Pegasus anyway.
Yeah,
I think it did lose some of its uniqueness in that way. Yeah,
I mean, it's good that it's been restored because you can see photos of it immediately after I think in the 50s and 60s before and it was just like basically overgrown and in a field,
Oh yeah, I mean, they never. In fact, people forget it was the British that actually started to, they're the ones who sorted out casemate 1, pumped it all out. It was Royal Engineers that did it,
right,
and got that museum open.
Right,
and it's gradually the French have come on board,
yeah,
and taken more and more, sort of thing.
Yeah,
rightly so.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I'd prefer to see the hangar, in a nearby field, or on the other side of woods, ideally where you can't see it. I mean, they could have built the hangar, I guess, in the car park over the road, but yeah, it's
as I say, I don't really want to go there anymore. It's there.
Yeah.
I said my bit over the last few years.
All right. Well, hey, we'll move on. So let's go to your website. So the day the Devils dropped in, it's here it is. Got a copy of this in the other room. One of the things that's different about your style of writing from, say, an author like Stephen Ambrose is that you put the direct quotes of the men, and as you said earlier, your interest is the voices of these people at the front and center of your narrative. So anyone who hasn't read one of Neil's books, to describe it to you, it's basically you're going to get the usual, this is the mission, these are the objectives blurb and stuff at the beginning, but thereafter, as we go through the narrative of the operation and what happened, it's usually broken down into a series of first-hand accounts from people who were there. So you're not hearing Neil's voice, you're hearing the voices of the men who were there, quoted from them, after action reports, that kind of thing. Occasionally interspersed with a bit of narrative from Neil. Is that a fairly accurate description? I feel like it is.
It is, yeah. I mean, I always, when I did decide to do it, because I'd spent 5 years going around interviewing all the men, so I had a lot of interviews and I found stuff which I thought was groundbreaking. And there was when you, I think things had changed a little bit, but particularly back then, you had books which said, "Oh, they took this town and such took this town," but you never read what it took to take that town, what the men went through and had to do to take that town. So I did have that in mind. The other thing I didn't want to do is put any hindsight in it.
Yes.
Really didn't want that at all, because I think that
Reflections now as opposed to reflections then, you know.
Yes, yeah. It takes something away from what they faced, because they didn't know things were going to be successful, or you know, at every level. So that was a real strong point that I made sure that I was going to do, was no hindsight at all. Plus, who am I to judge for a start off? But yeah, I mean, you said it there. I would prefer to hear the men saying what happened to them rather than myself describing. There's more impact to it. There's more truth to it. I mean, you have to be careful, of course. You had to do your homework, and really, I didn't want it to be like one of the voices, you know, forgotten voices books, which are just narrative just thrown together in effect, a little bit of chronological order.
Yeah.
I went to great lengths to corroborate what they were saying, where they were, what they did. And by that meant not just looking at Ninth Battalion, but anyone who's in the area. So it could have been commandos, other paras, French civilians, anything. But yes, basically your description's right after all that. Yeah.
Tiger Moth is asking, is that Bob Midwood on the right?
That is Bob Midwood on the right, yes.
Can you tell us a bit, who is Bob Midwood? Tell us a bit more.
Actually, those four men from the 22nd Independent Parachute Company.
Are that Pathfinders? They're Pathfinders,
yes,
right?
Yeah, it was their job to get in and set up the Eureka beacons, which brought in the main drop, and also holophane lights for the gliders. On the left, you've got Bobby de la Tour, Don Wells, and then John Vischer. And funny enough, that's for about 3.5 years, I've been researching for a book about the blowing of the 5 bridges across the River Deve.
Yeah.
And it starts off, I've started off with a 22nd Independent Parachute Company. So the book kind of follows paths through to these bridges. I had to stop, frustratingly, I had to stop to get the Pegasus Bridge book updated, but I'll be returning to that soon, and I'm really looking forward to doing that.
For anyone who doesn't know, I think this is the River Deve here. Am I right in thinking that this is the River Deve? Yes, it is.
Yes, there it is. Yeah,
and the objective, along with the objective of capturing the Merville Battery and immobilizing the guns and so on, as you say, one of the other objectives was to blow a series of bridges across the River Deve. The idea being that the Germans would not be able to bring heavy tank support into this flank if those bridges were blown. Now, this area here, which has got all the lovely blue lines in it, this was flooded completely to the tune of anywhere between 4 to 7 to 8 feet deep. And as Neil's book will tell you, I think about over half of the 9th Battalion, when they dropped, landed away from their drop zone, most of them in this swamp. And if you imagine landing in a swamp with heavy gear, weapons, webbing, boots, you know, your parachute, I don't know how many, but hundreds drowned. And I remember when we were talking about the Merville episode of Paratrooper, how we were going to portray that. And I said the best way to do it was to shoot a camera from above and follow one guy down and have him land in the swamp, and then pull the camera back, and he's screaming because he's drowning, he's getting pulled in. And as you pull it back and you go higher up, you can see that there are dozens and dozens and dozens of men all around him going through exactly the same thing. This is briefly shown in The Longest Day, with one guy kind of landing in one British paratrooper landing in water and basically getting shot by Germans literally as soon as he arrives. But I mean,
just to clarify that, for a long time, people did think that hundreds had drowned.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what do we know how many? I mean, is there any facts?
It's very difficult to confirm. I mean, we was having this conversation again, myself and one or two others, only recently, because they wanted to do something for this anniversary. So if you're taking the 9th Battalion, I mean, for a long time, the legend was there was 192 missing. That was always a bit debatable because the War Graves Commission didn't agree with that at all. But I don't know how long ago now, over 10 years ago, when the National Archives released the POW files, obviously there's a few of us looked at all those. Plus, there was some investigations into some of those that were dropped wide. Because I forgot to. Of course, the problem we have with the 9th Battalion is that the stick lists are lost. No one's coming across them at the moment, so that's part of the problem. But the numbers don't add up, that's for sure. And I've got my sort of personal list down to about 40 unaccounted for, really.
So potentially 40 drowned as opposed to a couple of hundred, which is
the trouble is, there's no names, no names to match the missing. That's the big problem. When I say unaccounted for, they might well have been dropped wide or somewhere else, but because we haven't got the full list of names for the 9th Battalion, it's extremely hard to nail it down.
Right.
But you're right, they had a lot of problems. I mean, Bobby de la Tour was very lucky when he landed. He landed in one of the dreaded ditches.
Yeah.
And, it was only because one of his men just happened to stumble and they heard the noise and managed to drag him out. Otherwise, that would have been it for him then.
Do we? There's a question from the Overseas Paranormal channel. Mate, sounds cool. I'll have to check your channel out. Did many overshoot the drop zone by miles? So I guess my question is, which do we know? We know about Glider 94, which was supposed to land at Pegasus Bridge, but actually landed at one of the Deve bridges, or near enough near one. But do we know what the furthest away a British stick dropped to the west or to the east from the intended drop zone?
Well, the one that springs to mind is a Canadian stick, which was near Le Havre. How on earth they ended up in Le Havre is anyone's guess.
And they were part of the 6th Airborne Division?
Yeah, they were supposed to be landing on the Variville DZ.
So, right, so they were supposed to be landing here.
Yeah.
But somehow they landed over at
Le Havre, yeah,
which is here. Now, were they captured? What happened to them?
Yes, they were captured.
They were all captured.
Yeah.
Damn. But that's
some of the 9th Battalion were south of that. I mean, it's anywhere from where are we? I see that Hall Gap.
So we got Cowberg.
Yeah, all in that area.
Yeah.
There was quite a few came down there, and there's a Frenchman, Ludovic Louis, who's a brilliant researcher, and he's got all sorts of stories about what happened to those that landed in that area. In fact, he's given a talk out in France. And
we've got James Webber on, who's Jim Webber's grandson. Jim Webber, of course, was in the battalion that crossed over Pegasus Bridge, and he fought like a tiger on D-Day. Was wounded several times. One time by a telegraph pole. I think I'm right in thinking this was.
Well, Jim. It was Taylor who was wounded by the telegraph pole, but Jim was in that same trench. Wounded. Hello, John, by the way, and I was going to mention you later because you played a big part in the update for me. So
we'll come on to Pegasus Bridge in a little bit. We were talking about this. I had Dale Dye on, and because he's trying to get a film made about, or a TV series made about the Battle of the Fair Bridge with 82nd Airborne, and we were trying to work out what the furthest stick was that was dropped off. And I know we know one stick from I can't remember if it's the 82nd or the 101st, but of course their drop zones were in this area here. One of the sticks was as far almost right over on this coast. It was not far off this coast. Insane distance away for them to try and get back. See, what year was the day the Devils dropped in? When was that first published?
It came out in 2001.
2000. And how did that? I mean, just for the budding authors that might be watching, you know, how did that start? So you got together your research, you were putting it all together. Did you start sort of just taking it around to publishers and saying, "Hey, I've got a book I want to do about the 9th British Battalion"? Was there people immediately interested? Just sort of talk us through what happened.
As I got through it, because obviously I didn't intend to write one at all. It was just for my own benefit. But when I did end up and got more and more involved with them, that's when I decided, yes, you know, I'm going to be mad not to, because this information that I'd found I thought was fantastic, and it would be great for people to read it. So, I mean, tentatively, I wrote to one company about what I was doing. I'm trying to think what they were. They were in Kent, and they weren't interested. So I didn't bother again until I'd actually virtually finished it, which took me 5 years. Actually, took 5 years to research it and write it.
So it was 5 years from, okay, I'm going to do a book about this, to, okay, this is ready to go to the publishers now. 5
No,
years.
it's from when I first started interviewing them until it was published.
5 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I'd been all around the country, everywhere, and I'd really, you know, I always say to everyone, it never ceases to surprise me, because I thought, hey, who the hell are you? I mean, I was meeting people. Obviously, I met Colonel Lotway several times. I interviewed him several times. Brigadier James Hill, and above all, who was really helpful was Napier Crookenden. Force of nature. What a man. So I did have those behind me, although they never actually got involved in any sort of pushing or to a publisher. So
was Sid Capon part of the 9th? Am I right?
Yeah, yes.
Was he one of the ones you interviewed?
Yes. Sid was one of the first ones I met, and he helped me no end in all sorts of ways. Yeah.
Yeah, because he's down as with again, assuming it happens, and I haven't written the script for this episode yet, but I have done a synopsis, and Capon is his perspective that the story is for the Merville episode.
Oh, good.
Yeah, because he was the one I could find the most information on. So I thought,
he did. He was, because he started going out there very early,
right?
So he knew people and whatever. So people went to him for interviews and that kind of thing. It was only later, really. I mean, they did the first coach tour for them for the 9th Battalion Reunion Club was '69, because obviously they were still working then and that sort of thing. So
right,
but yeah, with the publishing thing, I knew I wanted a lot of pitch photos of the men. It was very, very important for me to have photos of the men in there, because I wanted their faces there for posterity.
Yeah,
you know, so people can see who was talking. So I knew
this is 2000. This is 2001. So kind of self-publishing wasn't really a viable route unless you unless you did a print.
Well, that was no. What did they call it? Vanity printing then, didn't they?
Yeah, vanity printing, vanity projects, and which were never a good idea. So you had to take it to publishers, presumably.
Well, what I did was, as I said, I wanted the photos in there, and a book that had always struck me as being brilliant for that was a book about the Accrington Pals. I don't know if you've got that at all. It was quite a big book.
I haven't got that, but I know who the Accrington Pals are.
Yeah, and it put all their faces were in there, and it was a fantastic record. So I looked and thought, who published that? Pen and Sword. So that's why I went to Pen and Sword, and they gave it a major who did their thing, and he read it, and I remember he sent me a letter, or he rang me up. I can't remember, but he said, "We're umming and ahhing about it. Can you guarantee that the Airborne Museum will buy 500 copies?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Okay, we'll take a gamble on it." And it's been in print ever since.
Right.
That's about the 8th edition now. I mean, they're not massive print runs, but it's in about the 8th edition, something like that.
Yeah, I've got a copy, and actually, also we, funnily enough, I think you gave us a couple to raffle off at one point when the Pegasus Bridge project was still a thing that was a possibility.
And that will be, when I finish my Dave Bridge book, that will be updated as well. I've got a huge amount of material.
Doug Moody says,
Yeah,
I was 6 years
Doug.
too late giving you my dad's info for Devils, but I'm assuming this is going to be in the next edition.
Exactly, Doug. Definitely.
Judy Hops has asked an interesting question, which I'll put to you now. Do you know any opinions the German soldiers had of British paratroopers? I guess how they were perceived.
Well, they had a reputation from North Africa for being
Right.
tough, of course, and where we're getting the Red Devils nickname from.
Oh yeah,
I think it depended on the soldier. You know, a lot of them. It's rumoured at Merville, once they realised that they were paras, then it sort of sapped their morale and they packed it in. But other places, you know, with more professional, because obviously they were artillerymen, a few general infantry. But I think they were very well respected, that's for sure.
So the next book that you did after this, I'm guessing, was the Pegasus and Orne Bridges book, which is the latest edition of which is now just Pegasus Bridge, I'm guessing.
Yes, yeah.
So, and for those people that are interested, by the way, the links are already in the blurb below if you want to check out or order any of Neil's books. This is my copy of it from back in the day. And this was, people often asked me, you know, was your Pegasus Bridge script based on the Stephen Ambrose book, to which I would say absolutely not. In fact, I don't think I'd even read it when I first started. But anything I wanted to double check, it was always Neil's book, and you can see all my notes here on various pages. Yeah, so funnily enough, there is Michael McGee. The first time I heard about the Michael McGee tank attack was when I read about it in your book. Did you know? I think I told you. Did you know we'd filmed that sequence with Michael?
I think you did mention it. Yeah, I think you did. Yeah.
Yeah, we shot it. That sequence was the one sequence that was in both the Pegasus Bridge feature film script and the Paratrooper pilot script. That was the one place where they overlapped, although they both featured Pegasus Bridge, of course. That was one of the most complicated scenes, and the tanks that we wanted for that scene were being sold to America to a private collector. So I think we should film something with them before they get taken away, and they were the closest tanks we could get to the sort of tanks that probably would have been involved in that last push on the bridge. And so we filmed that scene. So I've actually got that scene in the bag. I might show you a clip of it before the end of the stream, but let's refocus to your book. So Pegasus Bridge is a natural next topic, because you've already done one book on one aspect of the 6th Airborne's involvement in Normandy. This book is now this book.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and this is the 80th anniversary edition. You can find Neil in Normandy on the 6th of June, where he'll probably have a stall set up, I imagine, in the Pegasus Bridge Museum. And if the same curator is there, please tell him I said hello. Absolutely star of a man, and the lady that works there as well.
Mark's just gone, actually. Mark Worthington, he's just left.
He's just left. Oh, what a shame. He was so good, but I mean, he had been in the job for a very long time. What about the lady that worked there, the French lady? Is she still there?
Yeah, she's still there. Yeah.
Oh, please tell her I send her a big hug from me. She'll definitely remember me. So one of the things you said, and I'm guessing this is going to be the definitive Pegasus Bridge book for anybody who's listening, is that you had uncovered one or two new things and you were going to update it with those new elements. Are there any sort of smoking guns that you found that you didn't know before, that you thought, God, I've got to include this?
I don't know about smoking guns. I mean, why it's been updated. I mean, it's 15 years. Hard to believe it's 15 years since the book came out.
I know.
And of course, although I haven't particularly published much on the 6th Airborne since, my research has continued all the way through. So while I'm doing like other things and looking into other things about the division, you always seem to come across bits and pieces. You think, oh, that's very interesting. So I kind of stash these things away, but also with the book coming out, people get to know about it, and I had lots of messages. Oh, my relations were there. So I've got some wonderful stuff from seaborne engineer officers, which I think enhances the book greatly. So it's right the way through. But I mean, I have to admit, I didn't intend to do exactly what I did, because I just thought I'll put in all the adjustments and whatever. It was only when when I was getting this stuff, I was just putting it in a folder and reading it and putting it away for a later date. And when I started looking at what I had, I realised that some of it was very in depth, and I'm so indebted to John Webber, who actually supplied me with a detailed typed list, which his father produced in, I think it was September 44 when he was in hospital.
Right.
And to put that into context, it had always been hazy that the fighting in the Vevey Company in southern Benneville. I mean, Nigel Taylor, the company commander, said that he could never produce a precise chronological order of what went on during the day, because it was so chaotic and then quiet and this sort of thing. And of course, it was wounded and in pump full of morphine. So,
and there wasn't a consistent front line, and it kept changing. And you had Lieutenant Hunter holding out in the farm, fighting over one bit. You had other guys in the grounds of the manor house holding there, and one of the things we did with the paratrooper pilot, because we know Cornell was a runner, and we know he was used as a runner on D-Day. Because they didn't have any radios. So the beauty of that was I could take him and put him anywhere I wanted in that battlefield, as his duties of a runner would have taken him. One message to this platoon or that platoon. And I got all those kind of nuggets of the little bits of fighting that were going on here and there from your book, which was, extremely helpful. James Webber says thanks, by the way, for the shout out there. And
well, I can't. I mean, it was so important. As I was saying, these little bits that I was just going to put those in, but I ended up literally dismantling the back 2/3 of the book,
right,
reanalyzing everything. I mean, this goes for John Sims Hedge on the other side for the 12th Battalion, all sorts of things. So literally took it apart, reanalyzed it, and incorporated the results in the new book. And the fighting in Benneville is far more, what's the word, cognizant, is that the word? Because I've also looked at the German. I mean, I did speak to correspond with Hans Höller and Werner Kaltenhaus back in the day, but Höller brought out a book since then which added some more detail.
Right.
So all this has been analysed, and the fighting now is, I think it's far clearer right throughout the day, from when the Germans first reached Benneville to when the seaborne engineers started to arrive and this kind of thing. So I'm a lot happier with it.
So for anybody who doesn't know, and I'm sure that's not many people, this is what was originally called Benneville Bridge, now known as Pegasus Bridge. The gliders of the Ox and Bucks, airborne infantry, effectively. The gliders landed here, 1, 2, and 3. 3 broke in half and landed in the swamp. One of the people on board drowned. Wasn't discovered until much later. They stormed across the bridge, took the other side. Famous Cafe Gondry is here. And then an hour later, the 7th Parachute Battalion landed. Of course, 2 other gliders landed over here, took this bridge. The 7th Battalion crossed the bridge, went into the villages of Benneville and Lepore, now effectively all Benneville. Oh, there's construction going on here. Look at this.
Yeah,
so this.
Unrecognisable.
Oh, terrible,
Great
man.
shame.
Yeah. Anyway, well, so this is the famous church, which was great to get detail on. There were 3 German snipers up in that church, and it was fired upon by a Piat from somewhere behind this wall. Incidentally, using this church, we decided in the end for both the Pegasus Bridge film and the Paratrooper pilot is a no-no. Too many modernisms. So we found another church in Normandy that's almost identical in design, and we were going to film those sequences there. Even though they were very keen, the mayor of Benneville was very keen for us to film here, but it's just too difficult. But so a lot of fighting took place around here in these buildings, and there weren't as many of them back then. And then the other fighting with the 7th, we seem to have zoomed right out again. Let me quickly correct that. Took place in and around the road that led south to Caen, and in and around the grounds of Chateau de Benneville, which the chateau itself wasn't believed to be occupied by the Germans, but they definitely had some spotters on the roof.
It's debatable. Certainly, Holler got in there.
Yeah. So we got permission to film in Chateau de Benneville, and I've been on the roof of that, which is a fantastic place to go up and check out. Also very helpful, and that would be a real location that we would use. The village was nothing like this. It only had probably about 12, 14 buildings back then, this side of the village, maybe.
Yeah, that field in the top left-hand corner, it was just a field, wasn't it?
Yeah.
All that to the left was just field.
All of this was fields. There were maybe a farmhouse or 2.
It was these opposite this crossroads here, those houses there, they were all there.
Yeah, where the gatehouse was for the and so on. Yeah, that's right. So the new Pegasus Bridge book covers the capture of the bridge and the fighting that took place. Do you go beyond the 6th at all, or is it still just sort of up to the evening of the 6th, the book?
It's just to the when the Oxen Bucks actually hand the bridge over. So it does, as it says, it's the capture, defence and relief. But it also covers, as before, the 12th Battalion and the 13th Battalion in Roanville, Barder Roanville. More detail on that kind of thing.
Dre Kings is asking, why was the 6th Airborne Division chosen for D-Day instead of the 1st Airborne Division? I guess you could ask the same question about Arnhem.
Well, they were still recovering from their exploits in North Africa, and the 6th Airborne was almost specifically instigated for this operation.
So they were put together specifically for D-Day, is what you're saying?
Yeah, initially, yeah, that was the whole thinking behind another Airborne Division, yeah.
Right, okay.
I mean, obviously the 1st were on standby to go out to Normandy as well, if things had gone badly wrong.
Do you know something about Operation Mush?
Mush wasn't an operation, it was an exercise, which was a D-Day exercise for...
was that the one that they did in Dorset or Devon or wherever the sort of they had somewhere with 2 bridges that was a bit similar?
Crikey. Oh, it was Lincolnshire, if I remember rightly.
Lincolnshire. Okay. So the original Pegasus Bridge book that I've got here is, well, not including the notes section, is about just shy of 300 pages, 290, let's call it. How many pages is the new edition?
It's 420, something like that. I mean, there's far more. The footnotes are far more. There's far more footnotes. There's more appendices. Plus, of course, the extra content.
I think one of the things that's, I found particularly difficult, it's very sad, of course, is when we first got the green light on the film. I think there was at least 15 veterans still living, if you combine the 7th Battalion veterans and the Ox and Bucks. And we interviewed nearly all of them. I think we would have had, if everything had gone to plan, 8 of them at least would have been alive for the premiere. Of course, sadly now they're all passed away. I was particularly close to Ron Perry, who heavily features in both of the screenplays. I'm still in touch with his son Howard. I think they've nearly all gone now, haven't they? Are you expecting to see any on the 80th? I don't.
Well, obviously, there's no Pegasus Bridge veterans as such. The one that it's a bit devastating, really, because they're going to be 6 airborne. They're going to be minimal, if any.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
There was one, Bill Gladden, who I was very close to, but he died a couple of weeks ago.
Right. Yeah, it's just, there's, you know.
He was 6 airborne armoured recce as well, so he was quite a rare bird.
We happy few, now very few, sadly, left from this time. Let's Pegasus Bridge, the new edition is out. It's available for order now. When does it actually drop, the official date?
Well, the publisher actually received the printed copies today, so they'll start going out from next week. I would have thought.
So anyone who's pre-ordered it, it's coming pretty soon. I
have to admit, the publisher and the printer have been absolutely brilliant. I mean, I delivered it late because it just took me so long, far longer than I thought, to get it to where I wanted it to be. And so they've made up the time, and the printer as well. I mean, amazing.
I've dropped the link for Saberstorm Books into the chat. Check out their website. You can see that they've got other books available, or Operation Ariel, which I'll confess is not something I'm familiar with, but I think it's to do with Dunkirk. Geronimo's Medics, to do with the 101st Airborne, also to do with D-Day. So, just when you think there couldn't possibly be another book on D-Day, there's usually one.
Just I think I was going to say funny, because my attitude when I first looked at it, I just fell in love with that area, and of course you can't falter like Pegasus Bridge.
No, indeed.
Before I started, I spent 6 months looking into what was out there, and what I found was, obviously you had Stephen Ambrose's book, but virtually everything emanated from Stephen Ambrose's book,
which had quite a lot of inaccuracies in it.
It did, yeah. I mean, it's ironic, really, because you can buy it anywhere, and it's set in stone and that kind of thing. But ironically, the Ox and Bucks weren't happy with it.
No,
Lovett wasn't happy with it, and in fact, Stephen Ambrose wasn't happy with it. But it wasn't his fault as such, because I mean, he did a tremendous amount of interviews,
right?
And they are the golden nugget of what.
Yeah, for sure,
fantastic.
I'm guessing it got severely edited or something.
Perhaps. Well, no, it was the publisher. He was intended printing it the following year. Have it right? They gave him 6 months,
so they
put it out for the anniversary.
They pushed it. It was a bit rushed.
So you can almost feel it as you go through it. That
it
starts off well, and then later on it kind of tapers off.
Yeah,
but it is interesting. So that's what made me think. Well, and that covered a lot of, mainly John Howard and that. So I thought, well, what about the men themselves? There's nothing much been written about by the men themselves, or they've been interviewed. So again, that's what I did.
This is an interesting question, which I'm going to address. Was Pegasus Bridge mined and made ready for demolition? Well, contrary to what you saw in the film The Longest Day, with people hanging off of girders and removing explosives from the bridge. Although there were some wires and things set up, the explosives themselves were all in a shed nearby. So the bridge had not been properly rigged to blow, if that's my understanding. And that was that note to me was in the 22 pages of notes that Neil gave me when he first read one of the earlier drafts of my Pegasus Bridge script, and I acted on of all his 400 salient points. I think I acted on 75 to 80% of them. Because I was keen for it to be as accurate as possible and not take too many dramatic liberties. Obviously, we had to do a few things. But I made the soldiers search for the explosives, but ultimately find that although they thought the bridge was rigged to blow, there was nothing there. So
one interesting little snippet, which is in the new book, which again, these little snippets are right throughout the book, which I've been picking up, but I find them fascinating. But the engineers found when they got under the bridge that the Germans had actually painted a square where the explosive was supposed to go.
Right. Which is why in the dark that might have looked like something, might have actually looked like it,
Yeah. Well, it was quite courteous of them to sort of highlight where they're supposed to go.
Yeah, that also perhaps gave rise to the rumor of dummies in place and that sort of thing, which is other stories that you might hear about that. Let's just give these aren't the only two books that you've written. So before we start to wind up, let's just have a look at your other library, as it were. And if you have any questions for myself or Neil, whack them in the chat now, and I will read them out before we wrap up. So you've got a few other books. There's a walking tour guide. Is that right?
That was sort of put together out of frustration, really, because of the amount of people that go to Pegasus Bridge who have got an interest. Maybe they've just stopped there on their way to the port at Weystrom, but it was just something I thought, well, they're looking at the stones, they're looking at the bridge, and they haven't a clue what's gone on here. So again, that was my first thing with Saberstorm. It's just we wanted a small pocket guide that was cheap, but was very detailed and could tell people. Yeah, what people could actually stand there. I mean, it's got lots of then and now photos.
Yeah,
you can find out what actually happened where. So that was what that was all about, really.
I'll show you a clip at the end, but I'll need to put some caveats on before people need to see clips of movies. So and I'll update. I know there's going to be some people watching from the Pegasus Bridge page, so I'll update you on where we're at with both of those projects. James Woolard says Merville operation was even more incredible than Pegasus Bridge, in my opinion, and I'll buy that book, Neil. Yeah, James, I made that point that it was probably the most dangerous mission, I think, of all of them, I think, on D-Day. So we have that guide. You've got a similar, I'm guessing this is like the Merville edition of the same thing.
Yeah.
So that's another one. Now we have these other ones, fighting with the commandos. So on this one, you edited it. So the recollections of Stan Scott. So it focuses primarily on the life of Stan Scott, who served in Number 3 Commando. Now, Number 3 Commando, was that under Lovett? Was that?
Yes.
So they were charged with getting to the bridge and so on.
Yeah, I mean, how it happened. Obviously, I was again trying to corroborate when the 9th Battalion were in Amfreville, and the commandos obviously liberated Amfreville.
Yeah,
and I wanted to find out exactly what had gone on. It was all a bit hazy, and obviously it's a commando area. They took over that area, and I went to one year. I can't remember which year it was, and they had their ceremony. And we're having a drink in the town hall, and I asked one of them what I was trying to do, and would he speak to me? He said, "Oh, you don't want to speak to me. You want to speak to Scotty." And as you can see there, Scotty come bounding across And what a character. Oh my goodness. He was just fantastic. His memory was the best memory I think I've ever heard from anyone. The army had been his life, and
Right.
he was incredible. He had an incredible life and was such a character.
How long is the interview that you've got there with him?
Well, that's something the National Army Museum did with him. They did
Right.
quite a few bits and pieces, and you can tell what he's like from those. There's one where he's describing the Fairburn knife and how to use it, which I don't know if they've taken that off.
So that's another one that's available. Now, is that still with Sabre, or do you?
No, that's Pen and Sword. That is. Although I think it's out of print. That's out of print now.
You might be able to get it on Amazon potentially.
Yeah, you might be able to get a second-hand one. Yeah.
And then Parachute Doctor, I think, is one. Again, you kind of edited it. Is that right?
Yeah, well, with Scotty, we actually put Scotty's together. I did loads and loads of interviews because he didn't live that far from me.
Right.
So that was hours and hours of interviews. But with David's, I'd gone to interview David for the Pegasus book, and afterwards he said that I put this thing together for my children. When the Pegasus book is finished, do you think you could help me polish it up a bit? So I did that. We started chatting, and I said, well, let's expand it and try so we can get it published. And because he had some wonderful memories, he had quite an extraordinary war, and there are some incredible photos in there of particularly when they went out to Java after the war, and had the Japanese fighting beside them. That was
right.
Extraordinary. So yeah, that is Sabre Storm, and as you can see, it's all colour all the way through. It's a high quality book.
So what are you working on next? I mean, are you going to do anything about the 1st Airborne and Market Garden, or does that just not interest you?
No.
Or is it, there's too many books already on that?
It interests me, but there are a huge amount of fantastic books about Arnhem, which still come out, incredible. But no, I'm madly in love with that area in Normandy, east of the River All. It just fascinates me, and to the detriment of everything else when it comes to history, but you can't do everything. But as I was mentioning earlier, I really want to get back to this Steve Bridge book because I'm really enthused about it. Again, they're not as obviously this is, as you said, the 3rd primary task of the division on D-Day, and again, virtually everything went wrong, and again, they achieved all their objectives. Yeah, and
Right.
I'll give you some examples. Well, we're running out of time, by the way. Or
no, we're okay. I'd normally go for a max of 90 minutes, so we're on 1 hour 13, so we're all right.
Right. Okay. Yeah, just a couple of examples. I'll mention one about David actually, but on the Dave one, the famous story about the Troan Bridge, where Major Roseveare commandeered the jeep, the medical jeep, and which is quite funny really, because obviously you'll read that they just commandeered it, but the way the medics put it was they were told to get their effing shit off the jeep and F off. That's you think that's typical power, isn't it? So they did, but the chap who was in charge of that jeep, because obviously it was full of plasma and stuff, he still had a job to do. So what he did was got a couple of parabikes and a couple of prisoners, and they lumped, I think, was it 250 pints of plasma to the proposed main dressing station.
Right.
And that blood saved the lives of goodness knows how many paras.
Right.
It's that, one man's action has had such a huge impact on that people's lives, Anyway, during COVID, his sons saw this post of mine on the website, and he got in touch. And I've now got a photo of him, and so that's what's great. He will now be remembered. You know, he deserves to be remembered for what he did.
And that action is going to be covered in some detail in the next book you're doing.
Yes, yeah,
and that's the one that covers the, among other things, the destruction of the bridges over the Dive. Is that right?
yeah. It is going to be slightly different to the others in that I follow paths. I've kind of reversed the order, really. You know, working back from the bridges, the 5 Troan, the 2 at Bure, 1 at Robom, and the other 1 at Varaville, because there's all sorts of influences on why it was successful and that sort of thing. And that's why I said I started off with the 22nd Independent Parachute Company and what happened to them exactly on the DZs. A lot of that is new stuff which I've been doing it quite a long time. And I'd interviewed Bob Stoodley, and he was one of the Pathfinders with Midwood, of course. And the stuff that he told me is not in the history books. You know, it's just plain wrong.
Right.
And there's all sorts of things about that. The 3rd Parachute Squadron Royal Engineers obviously had lots of the tasks to do to blow them. The 8th Battalion to protect the 2 bridges to the south. Canadian Parachute Battalion at Robom and Varaville. But it also covers the fighting at Varaville itself by the Canadians, which again is absolutely fascinating. And I'm hoping to get out there. I've got a lot of French contacts now because the French people in that area were very, what you might describe as resistant.
Yeah.
Some of them were very active in what they did. And they were important in the success of the Canadians on the day.
Well, it's funny. The name of the character slips my head. You'll know the woman I'm talking about. The woman who ran the chateau with
Leah Vion.
Leah Vion. Thank you. You know, she was never afraid to like dress the Germans down for their behaviour.
No.
She also ran the resistance network in the local area that like, smuggled airmen and stuff back to the UK. So you think of the bravery involved in that is, you know, that's pretty incredible.
And what I find impressive about her as well is she was a resistant from the moment the Germans arrived.
Yeah.
No hope of any sort of liberation or that kind of thing.
Varaville that you're talking about for the Canadians is here.
Yeah.
So presumably if you're covering this is, I imagine the fighting we're talking about is sort of between the 7th and the 20th of June, that kind of time.
No, this is all going to be D-Day.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So
although I may go over into the 7th at Varaville because a troop of 6 Commando, a bicycle troop, got there to take over from them.
Right.
And what happened to them the next morning was important. So it will go over, but that's it. That's it. There's so much detail on the day that it's just impossible to keep go for a week.
Oh yeah, here we go. First, I was just wondering if there were any memorials.
Yeah.
First Canadian Parachute Memorial here, just off the side of the main road. I'm guessing.
That's actually it's not the 1st Battalion Memorial there. What that is, in that gate, that's the gatehouse.
Yeah.
And there was a German strong point right opposite here on this crossroads, which they had a plan to attack. It was quite an involved plan as well. C Company that was, and they'd been spread everywhere. There was hardly any of them, but there was a right on that where you've got your arrow. There was a gun it was about a 50mm gun.
Right.
And they didn't know. They'd been told it was probably an anti-tank rifle. And some of these Canadians took up residence in that gatehouse, and this gun fired a shot that went straight through the upper room. Was it the upper room? No, the lower room first of all. And then, so they got a Piat out, and they thought they might be able to hit the gun with a Piat, but it fell short. The next round went into the upper level, and it killed the CO of C Company and a number of other men. It was terrible, and that's what that memorial is there. It lists all their names.
Right. Okay. Oh, I see. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty interesting to think that the fighting was, you know, on D-Day was taking place as far east as that. That's quite a significant distance from the bridge.
Yeah.
By any measure, and of course, this would have been a main road in for the Germans to the site of battle. I'm guessing, like all, yeah, there's always a formidable church in all of these villages.
That's a new one.
Oh yeah,
the original was destroyed.
Yeah, you can tell from the structure of it and also the way that this is shaped and these windows. You can tell that that's a new design. Do you have a photo of the original one?
Yes, it will appear in the book. Yeah, there's a good few original photos of Arraville which have been useful.
Yeah, because I imagine if looking at the strategic location of that town, the fighting there must have been pretty brutal.
Well, they say that I don't say too much, but that strong point had about 50 men in it, and that was about at least twice as many as the Canadians had that were facing it.
Right.
And literally, they bluffed them into surrendering with the help of this French lady. And once they'd done that, it was their job to get back to the Lemenal crossroads and take up position on the Breville Ridge.
So there were a couple of comments. I'm just gonna. I think the chat's kind of answering some of them themselves, but Drakings asks for Neil, what were the orders for Major Howard if the bridge had been blown before they got across? I know the engineers brought some dinghies and whatnot.
They had some wooden boats. Yeah, they had two boats to get across. They'd also been training, like some of the men. Bill Gray was one of them because he was a good swimmer, to swim across with ropes and sort of get across that way. But the 7th Battalion they were far more well equipped. They all jumped with inflatable boats and this sort of thing. A company had trained to do those crossings in case they'd been blown.
Yeah, and there was not long after D-Day, I think further north of the Benneville Bridge, there was a Bailey Bridge built as well, wasn't there?
The first one was south, yeah. The engineers that were turning up on D-Day,
yeah,
were they went into southern Benneville because that's where they were supposed to rendezvous to check out where to put the bridge. But yeah, it was the first one was actually south of the canal bridge.
South. Okay, that's interesting to know. And if you go on to Amazon, as I have lined up here, you can see that also Neil's books are all available there. Look, you can already order the hardcover pre-order price guarantee of Pegasus Bridge. But of course, if you're going to be in Normandy, you should wait because then you can accost Neil in and around. He'll be found in and around the Pegasus Bridge Museum on the 6th of June, and then later at the nearest pub.
They're so busy on the 6th. The actual launch is on the 3rd.
So you're going to be there a few days before?
Yes, yeah, but I will be doing some signings at the Cafe Gondre as well.
Right, and you can still get The Day the Devil's Dropped In. There are a few. You can get it on Kindle, of course, and there are some secondhand copies going on Amazon as well. Is there anything else you want to plug or comment on before we wrap up?
The only thing, hopefully, because this I'd always wanted to do some sort of touring, but when I spoke to people, it was all too general. And what I want to do, obviously, is promote the 6th Airborne Division. And a retired major approached me to do exactly that. So
right.
he set up a company, and the next one, hopefully, that we're going to do is September. We did one last year, and I was really pleased with it. It was very rewarding for me. I'm not talking about financially because it wasn't, but it was.
Are you talking about? Sorry, just to be clear, are you talking about a battlefield tour, or are you talking about touring?
Battlefield tour.
not touring with your book and doing a talk. You're talking
No. This is actually walking the ground.
right.
Pegasus Bridge, Benneville,
Sure.
Ronville, Barder-Ronville, Merville,
Yeah.
Redhill Ridge. Again, it's centred around the men, though. It's centred around the men's stories. So you'll see their faces, where some of them died, and ultimately where some of them are buried. But it's a detailed tour. It's very, I think, well, hopefully people will like it. The people that came with us before did.
Yeah, it's always quite, it's quite moving when you go either into the cemetery of the church at Le Port or you go to Ranville, and the tower in Ranville is still covered in bullet holes, incidentally, for people that want to check it out, the church tower. And yeah, you can see the graves of the people that died. And I think the grave of Brotheridge, I think, is in the Ranville cemetery.
It's in Ranville churchyard.
Ranville churchyard.
Yeah.
So when we went there to get photographs of it last time we were there, there was a wasp's nest in his grave, which was quite disconcerting because he's on that embankment on the side. Yeah, just to the right of the church. If the church is on your left, there's an embankment that goes around that's just in from the wall. And if you want to find Brotheridge, he's just along there on the right, kind of away from some of the others because he was buried quite early. And the mound that kind of where it hits with the path, that they built their nest in there right at the foot of his grave. So we couldn't get close to it because it was surrounded by all these wasps. So he had his own protectional security force in operation to keep away tourists, which was very effective. Thank you for putting that up, Atom Gray. There's the link for the book as well.
The tour company, by the way, is called Army Group 1944 Battlefield Tours. And it's run by Major John Redfern, who is a wonderful man. Let me
just get that again, and I'll see if we can put the link up for their website direct. I know you mentioned it as well on your own. It's called Army Group. Give it to me again.
No, Army Group 1944 battlefieldtours.com.
Battlefield Tours. Let's just get that. Yep. Okay, I have it. Very good. Run by a major, no less.
Yes.
Retired, presumably.
Yes.
Doug Moody is saying he's going to see you on the 3rd.
Oh, good. I look forward to it, Doug.
So, yeah, all right. Well, to wrap up then, as somebody asks, I will show you a little bit of footage. First of all, though, I just want to, we'll do that at the end. So I just want to thank Neil for giving up his time on a Friday night. He's normally out clubbing, of course, on Fridays, but he's giving it up to come on and do an interview with me, which is fantask.
Thanks very much for asking me.
No, not at all. You're always welcome, and it's quite nice to. I think I've had one other historian on, if I remember rightly. So it's always good to have a variety of guests. And for those people watching, this is Industry Interview 61. My other interviews include people like Ron Underwood, who directed the film City Slickers with Billy Crystal, and Tremors with Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward, the late great Fred Ward, and producer Gail Ann Hurd of Aliens, Terminator and Terminator 2 dropped into that interview as a surprise guest on the channel. There's a whole load of other ones with the stuntman, including Alan Graff, who directed all of the action second unit for the film We Were Soldiers with Mel Gibson. So there are some other historical connections if you seek them out and see which ones might be of interest to you. We've had a great interaction with people in the chat. Thank you so much for coming in and asking Neil questions and so on. And so, yeah, so I will show a little clip. I just want to caveat this. So for those people that don't know the story, and I won't give you the long version, the short version is, yes, I was the main driving creative force behind the Pegasus Bridge film, which should have finished shooting in 2017, 2018, should have been out 2019. It lost its funding for reasons I won't get into here. I also didn't have the rights to the screenplay for a couple of years. They effectively got taken out of my hands. And again, we won't get into the hows and whys of that now, but it was all very unpleasant. By the time I got the rights back, the project was effectively dead and it didn't have any funding. Whilst I didn't have the rights, I tried to pitch a TV show to Amazon, Netflix, all the usual people, about a European Band of Brothers show, which covered airborne operations again, but from the Canadian, British, German, Polish point of view. And then there were some other episodes as well, and this would have covered Operation Biting and a whole load of would have covered Pegasus Bridge in Sicily. There's an episode on Crete told from the German perspective, and so on and so on. That project is not dead. That project is alive and well, and we've been doing things behind the scenes to try and get it seen by the right people. One of the things that happened a few years ago was we raised a small amount of money to shoot a sequence, a rough sequence for it, not with the proper money, not the proper budget that you would have to shoot a sequence like this under normal circumstances. And we shot it in a very, very short period of time, just so we could put together a rough thing of this is kind of what it will look like. So I'll show you guys a clip of that now to round off. It is not got a final mix of sound effects, etc., and it's also not a final edit by any means. There's also some storyboards and stuff inserted. I'm not going to show you the whole sequence, but I'll show you a couple of minutes to round off this. Neil, do you want to say anything else before we sign off? I know people can obviously meet you on or about the 3rd of June in Normandy. So do if you're over there, do make the effort. Neil's a very friendly bloke, especially if you
come and chat. I always like to chat.
If you buy him a pint, he really does like to chat. So fantastic. And by all means, when your next book is out, let me know and we'll have you back on. So all right, then we'll on that note then I'll show a quick clip of this. I don't know if the sound's going to share, but we'll see. And this is Sydney Cornell. This is from it's like I said, it's a rough cut of a sequence from the Paratrooper Pilot, which covers the story of Sydney Cornell, the first black paratrooper in the British Army. We hadn't cast the role when we shot this sequence. We shot this sequence because the tanks were being sold and were being sent to America. So we decided to see what we could grab with them, with the funds that we had available, not the funding for the show. So again, just treat everything as rough, but here you go.
Take cover! Take cover! Tank up the road. Cover fire!
And there you go. That's enough. So, yeah, that was a rough cut of that sequence. That's Michael McGee charging the tanks out in the open with his Bren gun. That did actually happen, and they did set that tank on fire. And he was a madman. He charged it in the open, and that was what stalled the last German serious attack to try and recapture Pegasus Bridge. So, Neil, there you go. That was your words that gave me that sequence. So you never know, guys. We might get the funding to complete that and polish it all off properly and all the rest of it. So you never know. You never know. Keep an eye on the Pegasus Bridge and Paratrooper Facebook pages. They're two separate pages. But if anything ever happens with either of those projects, it will always be first announced there. And look, I know people were very frustrated that the film didn't happen. Trust me, I know. I was on the front line of that. I was the one that had to tell all the veterans' families, I'm sorry, this isn't happening. I was the one that had to get phone call after phone call of, I'm sorry, but my father's died. When I knew that their fathers were dying to be alive to see this film be completed. And, you know, that was not, it was awful to have let them down by that. It's difficult for me to talk about it without getting really upset. But we never stopped looking. We never stopped looking for funding. We explored a number of opportunities. We nearly got the green light right before COVID happened. There was an investor there. I won't bore you with the details, but of course, then we had lockdown, and that killed us again. So after that time, it was pretty difficult to try and galvanize the energy to do it again. But there are still things happening with Paratrooper, not so much Pegasus Bridge, in the background. So if there is anything to tell you, you'll read about it first. I know Paul Biddis. I've interviewed him. He's been on the channel. You can see an interview with Paul Biddis on the channel. I've also interviewed Dale Dye. So yeah, we know all about military advisors, don't worry. And we had a military advisor, by the way, on the day that was shot, former Royal Green Jacket, and we had about 8 young paratroopers under the age of 25 who were our kind of leads, and he worked with them for the day, doing pepper pot maneuvers and all kinds of things. Anyway, so thanks guys for hanging around to say that. Neil, thanks very much. We're going to end it there. Don't forget to check out the links for Neil's books. Do grab a copy if you're not going to be in D-Day. All the information is already down there below. I will be back on Sunday, sometime between 8 and 8:30. We might be starting it a little bit later than normal, where we're going to be doing our continued breakdown of the show Band of Brothers, and we're going to be talking about the original episode 4, Personal Effects, which was cancelled. They never filmed it, but we have the script for it. So we can't show the script on screen because we've been contacted by HBO and they've said, naughty, you're not allowed to do that. So we are going to be talking about the episode and everything that it was going to originally contain. I'm sure you'll find it interesting if you're a fan of Band of Brothers. Check that out and check out the other breakdowns. They're really detailed. We've got somebody who worked on the show on every episode with us. So until then, thanks very much for tuning in. Thanks to Neil for coming on, and we'll speak to you all again real soon.